Hi, are you a gifted or twice exceptional adult who feels a bit stuck in your journey? Do you have goals and dreams which you would love to achieve, but you don't know where to start or feel a little bit overwhelmed? Or maybe you have 1,000 ideas, 500 projects, and get distracted by your own thoughts and would love some support on focus and accountability? Whatever gets you stuck, I wholeheartedly believe that gifted and twice exceptional specific coaching will help you unleash your power so that you can be your most authentic gifted self. I recently embarked on my journey on becoming a gifted and twice exceptional coach. So if you are interested in working with me one-on-one, please reach out via email at hello@giftedunleashed.com, or you can find more information about my coaching offers on the website giftedunleashed.com/coaching. I would love working with you and I would love to get you unstuck. So please reach out and let's get started. Hello and welcome to Gifted Unleashed, where we talk about the gifted and twice exceptional brain and how it affects our thinking and experience of the world differently. There are a lot of stereotypes and stigma around the term giftedness, and I'm here to challenge those. I'm here to raise awareness and to have a conversation around the topic of what it means to be a gifted and twice exceptional adult. Common experience among gifted folks is that they feel out of place. They don't quite fit in. They're too sensitive, too intense, too emotional, too overexcitable, and too deep thinkers of the world and about themselves. So if you have been called too much about anything, this show is for you. I'm Nadia. I'm too loud, too colorful, too bubbly, too bossy, and I love to talk too much. So welcome to my world. I'm so happy you're here. So welcome, everyone. I'm glad to have you back listening in today. Today, we have Gail Post on the podcast. She's a clinical psychologist, a doctor in clinical psychology. She's a parenting coach and consultant, workshop leader, writer, parent of 2 gifted young adults, and a clinical associate professor of psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania. And she has been in practice for over 35 years. And she specializes in intellectual and musical giftedness and twice exceptionalities. She has written a lot of different blogs, chapters for books, articles, and she has also written a very amazing book, which we're going to talk about today. It's called The Gifted Parenting Journey, a guide to self-discovery and support for families of gifted children. So thank you so much, Gail, for joining today. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited too. This is so great.
So I hope I said everything correctly. Is there anything you would like to add, or is there anything I misspelled?
No, totally fine.
So listening to your introduction, the topic you're talking about and specializing in, do you have a gifted story of your own? Can I address the elephant in the room? Are you a gifted adult?
I don't know. Maybe, probably. I grew up in an era where they didn't really test for giftedness, or at least I wasn't tested. But, I was in, the advanced reading groups, all that stuff. I know that I was gifted in music. I started music at a young age and performed at a high level, but did not go into that as a career. So that was kind of a given. But intellectually, I was actually kind of an underachiever in high school. I know it sounds weird, I have a PhD and all, but, I was like, I think what Delisle refers to as a selective consumer, that I picked and chose what I liked, what interested me, the teachers I liked, and I gave it everything. And all the other subjects I kind of pushed by the wayside. Of course, once I got into college, I had to step up my game a little bit, especially once I realized I wanted to go into clinical psychology and go to grad school for that. Then that was a very competitive program. And I had to really learn how to study for the first time and all those skills that a lot of gifted kids and other kids in general don't have. So my interest in this niche in my clinical practice is really based on years of, first of all, after leaving some of the agency type settings that I had been in and working in private practice, I saw a lot of folks who were really bright, high achieving people. And there were certain characteristics, sort of an intensity or an impatience with things not going as quickly, or perfectionism, all those adult qualities that kind of stand out. So that really piqued my interest. And then raising two gifted children, I got involved with the local high school gifted parenting support group, where we advocated for change with how children were identified, how services were delivered, all of that. And once my youngest was about to graduate, I decided I wanted to keep advocating. So I started a blog, which wasn't about myself. It wasn't about children, although, stuff kind of leaked in, but it was mostly about parenting, advocacy, gifted adults, gifted children, gifted education. And that blog, Gifted Challenges, has been going on, I guess, 11 and a half years now, so a long time. And I try to put out a post once a month, if possible. I also have a newsletter where I send that out for people who sign up, just with information going on out in gifted world, just different articles that I find interesting. And I've been writing for a range of different publications. I'm working on 2 research papers, one related to resilience in gifted individuals, and also the other based on some research I did prior to my book. But mostly I'm just, I write about mental health issues. I also write on Medium, which is a popular site, and I write for a publication there called Wise and Well. So just doing a lot of things, but my mission is really to get the word out how gifted folks, children, adults, and parents of the gifted really struggle and their needs are not recognized.
Reading through your book, I felt there's so much love, coming through for people, and especially the parents. So it's not another, typical parenting book of like how to deal with your children, but it's really the book for the parents themselves. And I could really feel how you would like to share some like love to the parents, saying, what you do is enough. And here are some tools, and you're not by yourself. And, giving them like a virtual hug somehow, I felt. Did I read that correctly?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad that came across. I mean, it really was kind of a labor of love, because I have just encountered so many parents who struggle. They don't feel understood. They feel like they can't even talk about their child's successes because they're worried people are going to think they're bragging. Or if they complain, like, gee, my child really, is failing such and such a class, they're like, oh, well, don't worry about it because they're going to go to Harvard or something, some nonsense like that, So it's really tough on parents. There also a lot of the guidance out there in terms of child raising is geared toward normative, typically developing children, and it doesn't always fit with parents of gifted children. They have kids who question everything. They're like little junior lawyers who are always trying to convince the parents otherwise. Or they may have a lot of intensity, or they may have a lot of rigidity, like not wanting to do certain things just because it doesn't feel right. Many have a lot of empathy and sensitivity and feel for others and have a lot of compassion. And other kids have some impatience. They're frustrated that their peers don't get it. Many don't fit in. Often they have what is known as asynchronous development, where their maturity lags behind their intellectual abilities. So people don't quite get it. Their parents are in the checkout line and their child is reading the ingredients on a can of food, but they're having a meltdown, and the checkout clerk is looking like, what? That doesn't make sense. So it's a challenge with parents, and they need to really appreciate it.
So you mentioned already a few difficulties that gifted parents face, right? If they have the luxury to really understand or getting the child tested, I think that's also not always a given, depending the socioeconomic background, the school area. I believe in the US, for example. In other countries, that's not done either. So you do mention, though, that parents usually have a good understanding, that they have the gut feeling, but sometimes they really don't dare say out loud, oh, my child is actually gifted. Right. What would you say to those parents that are listening, that they say, well, I'm not sure?
Well, first of all, the label is fraught with complexity, because there's often this urgency about, I need that label to validate what I see. And there's so many different definitions of giftedness out there. Typically, an IQ of 130 or above is kind of the standard definition, but there are many other forms of giftedness: creativity, mechanical skills, artistic and creative skills. I mean, there's so many other aspects of it, but parents are often looking for that validation. And children perform, even if they get IQ testing, they perform differently on a given day. If they're tired or cranky or hungry, they're not going to do as well. If they don't like the person offering the testing, they're not going to do as well. And things change as they get older. Some parents want to get their children tested as young as 3, and they're just usually not ready for that. They might get a sort of a rough idea at that age, but there's a lot of development that still needs to happen. Often the sweet spot for testing is between about ages 6 and 8, but you could, get tested at any point. And, it just gives information about strengths and weaknesses, because we're not all, the same level. We all have our strengths. We all have things that we struggle with. And I think it's really good information to have. Now, what you pointed out was really valid. It's a very expensive thing. I personally don't do testing anymore. I haven't done that in a long time. I think that people who do evaluations need to be doing them on a regular basis. And I don't do that. So I put that aside. But it does cost a lot of money when people get tested, and insurance often doesn't cover it. As you mentioned, there are some states in the US where the school systems offer the option for gifted evaluations, but every state is different here. And I don't know if it's the same in different provinces or countries, but it's, some states don't even acknowledge the term gifted. And others have a legal mandate that if your child needs to be tested, they will be tested. But some researchers now are saying, let's look at local norms. Like, let's look at how the children are in the context of their classmates. So regardless of testing, if a teacher has a student who is really exceptional and grasps things quickly and is eager to learn, all that, it doesn't really matter if they're tested or not. They need some kind of enrichment or acceleration. Otherwise, they're going to become bored and miserable. So in some ways, the testing isn't always that necessary, but it's informative, but again, not critical.
Yeah, you mentioned just something very important, that, the gifted children is not just a nice label to have, because as you also mentioned in the book, sometimes it can feel for others when you say, oh, I'm the parent of a gifted child, that they feel like that's a privilege and your child will succeed in life. But as we both know, right, it comes with challenges. The social emotional needs of the gifted are different. And as you mentioned, they get bored or just don't perform very well in a regular classroom.
Right.
And also the asynchronous development, or if children have a learning difference on top, ADHD, right, or autism, dyslexia, all of that also makes it all more complex.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point. Children who are, and adults who are identified as twice exceptional, where they're gifted, but they also have a coexisting concern that can work against their gifted abilities. So someone with, as you mentioned, ADHD or autism spectrum disorder, they struggle with how they use their gifted abilities, and their giftedness may be masked and their exceptionality may be masked, since schools often don't identify them. I see this particularly with girls, that girls are often overlooked because how those two conditions are manifest is really different depending on the gender of the child. Little boys are very quickly called out as having ADHD, when in fact, maybe they don't have it. Maybe they're just highly energetic and they just want to run around. They don't want to sit still, because school's tough. School forces kids to sit still at their desks, and a lot of kids aren't ready for that. So it does take some training and skill to kind of evaluate that. But what we know is a lot of gifted kids are overlooked. Certainly children who are persons of color, grow up in impoverished homes, English language learners, children who just don't, to the teacher, look gifted, whatever that means. So it could be that they're not super verbal. They don't talk a blue streak. They have very unique interests. So they get overlooked. And certainly the exceptionalities, everything from learning disabilities to a mental health condition to ADHD or autism, they get overlooked.
Yeah. So I do not have children, but reading through your book and reading, a lot about gifted children, because there's a lot, or currently, I believe, a little bit more content targeted for children. I can relate as my former self as a gifted child. I wasn't identified in school, but, I could really relate to the story of not having to do homework. And then once school gets a little bit tougher, then you don't know how to sit down and study. So that's always very interesting for me to read these stories and like, oh, yeah, I experienced that. And going through this material also kind of like healing my inner child, I feel like.
Yes. Oh, good. I'm so glad, because it is such a reminder, because regardless of what was going on academically in schools, most gifted adults, when they look back, they recognize some of the emotional features, not always quite fitting in, feeling socially awkward, feeling like they react stronger than their peers to different things, struggling with their sense of self, existential issues at an early age, finding their sense of identity, losing faith in some of the values that may have been tossed their way when they were younger. Some, stop going to, religious services that their family goes to, or they may question, why is there war? Why is there poverty? Like, they're just really struggling on a deep level. And I think looking back, a lot of gifted adults see that in their childhood. As I was writing this book, before I wrote it, I put together an online survey and sent it out through some of the gifted parenting groups and other websites. And a lot of responses, got 428 responses, which was amazing. And people answered some basic questions, and they also shared some of their experiences in a very heartfelt way. But it was interesting, as you talk about not always knowing if you're gifted, that 25% of the parents recognized that they were gifted, even though they weren't identified. Once they had a gifted child and they could see, like, oh, that's not normal behavior, right? Like, I may have been told that I talked before I was 1, or I may have been told by my parents that, was reading before I was 3. And so I assumed that was normal when my child started to do that. And then I see the other kids don't. So, we only have our own personal experience to draw on, and or what our parents shared about our experience growing up. And that just seems normative. And then a lot of times, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So gifted kids, often if they're biological children of their parents are also probably gifted, or there's a lot of other relatives or siblings who are gifted. So they kind of grow up in this conglomerate of giftedness, and they just think that's the way the world works, but it's not. It's really not. And, even for myself as a psychologist, I should have known better, but I didn't. Raising my own kids, it's a whole different ballgame, and I didn't always recognize certain things. I just thought, yeah, that's kind of normal. That's the way it should be, because I also wasn't a developmental pediatric psychologist either. So I wasn't as familiar with the younger ages. But then as I saw what some of the other kids were like volunteering in the schools when they were in elementary school, I would see what the rest of the class was like. And I was like, oh, yeah, they are different, for better or worse. So now we got to do something about it and help them get through this without it messing them up.
Oh, I love that story. And thank you for sharing this. And I just want to point out, because in your book, you mentioned that, when parents of gifted children get confronted with their own possible giftedness, that it's usually the women that might reject it the most.
Right. I know. That was what some of the research that I read had pointed out, that they're often like, no, it's probably the dad, or it's probably some uncle or something, but it couldn't be me, whereas the men were almost like, they're more ready to jump on the bandwagon and be like, yeah, I was probably gifted. But yeah, typical. Now, hopefully that's changed, because some of that research was from 20 years ago. Hopefully women are more capable of recognizing their own strengths.
And I'm just going to refer to the first question I asked you, if you're a gifted adult. Okay. And so probably very likely. Yeah. But yeah, I think for me, using this term, this label for myself, it feels weird saying I am a gifted adult. It's not, it's not something, one says, and I use it for advocacy. And I know that's also a very big topic for you, right? Learning how to advocate for your gifted children so they get the support that they need. So, and basically me taking on this icky label, still feeling like, okay, like Paula Prober said, like barely gifted. But
I know. I love how she said that. That was perfect.
So basically, but just saying it so that other people may feel like more comfortable embracing it as they go into adulthood, because gifted children grow up to be gifted adults and the problems don't go away, don't they?
Right. And in my clinical practice, I work mostly, I don't work with young children. I work with teens and adults. And a lot of the gifted adults I see, it's the same stuff. Maybe they feel a little more empowered, but it's the same stuff of finding their peers or finding a creative outlet or finding a job that meets their needs. It's really challenging. Lots of frustration that goes on. So, and we bring who we are along the way, and recognizing those gifted quirks and needs, quirk not in a negative way, but, just differences and needs is so important to find the right fit and to be okay with that.
Yeah. And what I really loved about, the book is that you focus really on the parents and say, good parenting starts with self-discovery journey. So it's not so much about here are the tools to help, raise gifted children, but it's really this, let's go through this journey of self-discovery, even if this sounds a little bit counterintuitive because you might have, kind of an emergency situation with your children here. Do you want to explain a little bit why that is so important and what are some of the steps that you recommend in this self-discovery journey?
Sure. Some of that I think comes from my psychology background, just that I feel that we learn if we can look inside. That doesn't mean like, hours and hours and hours of going over our childhood necessarily, but it's more about looking at what we need, what we're truly feeling, kind of having that inner compass, understanding ourselves more, and then looking at how we were raised, what our family of origin taught us. There's certain automatic, reflexive behaviors and beliefs that it's like, oh, that's just how things are done. It's just how we do things. And it may not be how you want to parent or how you want to just live as a gifted adult, just because that's how your parents raised you. So to really pick apart, what influences me? So whether it's gifted parenting or just gifted adulting, what influences me? Is it my family of origin? Is it my friends? Is it my community? Is it what I read about online? Is it what my boss tells me to do? Like, what are the influences and which ones seem to fit and which ones don't? And to have that sort of internal recognition that, oh, that doesn't feel right. That isn't going to work. And as a parent, to have that recognition about yourself that, I subscribe to certain type of parenting approach versus another, but also what works with my child and what works in the moment with my child. So you might have a child, for example, that responds well to humor, and you can sort of joke with them and, kind of get them out of their stuckness. But then there might be a certain point where you don't want to use humor because then they're going to feel devalued. Like maybe they come home and they're really crushed because their best friend rejected them or they did poorly on a test. That's not, so to be attuned, that attunement is so important, to be attuned to what your child needs in the moment. And to have a whole toolbox of things you can use, different strategies, approaches. But each child is very different. Having 2 children of my own, I was really able to understand and actually be amazed at how different one child is from the other. I think parents of only children often don't have that luxury to see that, well, they may think everything that's going on is my fault. I'm doing it all wrong, as a parent, as opposed to, no, they have a certain temperament and that's what we have to work with here. So it's complicated. But again, it's about looking deeply and doing that through a variety of different modalities. So It could involve chatting with close friends who you really trust or a partner you really trust. It could involve reading, getting educated, learning lots of different approaches. It could be joining a group for gifted adults or parents of gifted children and seeing what they think. It could be talking to other professionals, a teacher, a pediatrician, other physician, a psychotherapist who's trained in this. So just finding a range of different tools. Certainly spiritual guidance can help some people, creative outlets, drawing about it, writing about it, singing about it, reading about it, like whatever outlets you have, the more insight you have, because we're all growing and learning. I mean, I'm still learning so much at this point in my life. And it makes life fun to be able to learn. So it's not like we suddenly figure it all out by the time we're 30. That just does not happen.
Oh, we all think that, right? When we're small, when we're children, we're like, if I'm an adult, I will have it all figured out.
Right. Exactly. Boy, it's not the way it is.
No, that's the joy of life, to continuously learn and grow and the self-discovery piece. I really love that. And I also see, my friends who are parents finding out their children are twice exceptional, trying to tell them that their own gifted journey might be really important for them to take on right now and not wait until, the child has all the support and you have figured it out for your child, because it's usually in parallel that works probably best when you learn also for yourself if you're a gifted or twice exceptional adult.
I just said it is quite a learning experience and one that hopefully people can embrace and not feel bad about, because it's just another way of learning and not using giftedness as an excuse or as a badge of honor in some way, but it's just a fact, just like your eye color or your skills and talents in certain areas or the things that you really struggle with. It's just something to work with and to figure out how to make it grow and blossom in a healthy way rather than pushing it away or pretending it doesn't exist. I mean, I've actually read articles online, not as much lately, but years ago, where people would be like, I'm not going to allow my child to be gifted. That's going to mess them up. And so they're not gifted and I don't go along with it. Or things like giftedness is only an elitist concept. It's only for parents who, think too highly of their children, like all this negativity, as opposed to there are cognitive differences across populations. And that's just the way it is. And just to work with it, just like if a child required special education where they had cognitive deficits that made it harder for them to learn, you wouldn't say that doesn't exist and we're not going to help them. I mean, it's really the same thing.
Yeah. And I think currently what I hear in my surrounding is not so much the elitist, it's just learning for the first time about the concept, actually. Learning that this exists. And of course, they heard the term, but they had all this prejudice and would never assume this label were for them or their children. And now they're confronted with this term, what it means to be different, getting some explanation for their own experiences. But it's usually a little bit of an emotional roller coaster in the beginning.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's really hard to take on the label yourself and also to deal with your child and to know what to say to your child. So some parents don't tell their child at all. They won't explain it to them. Others, might go overboard, like celebrate, like, yeah, you're gifted, but it's, you don't say, yay, you're, I don't know what, you're a certain height. I remember my youngest child, I was like, what do you want for your 16th birthday? And he's like, I want to be 6'2". I'm like, it doesn't work that way, but I mean, because, you can't ignore just the reality of how people are physically, emotionally, and cognitively. And who better than us as parents to explain it to our children? Because if we don't, someone else will. Mm-hmm. Or they'll figure it out themselves in a way that doesn't make sense. So if it's not explained to them in a very matter-of-fact, yeah, you scored a certain amount on a test, so you're going to be in a program at school that's going to probably be more fun and enriching. But, it's not a big deal. It's just, like you already know that you're good at math or something, like it's just as matter of fact as it can be. It doesn't make you better than anyone else. You're not better than the other kids. But, you see how some kids, run faster or draw more accurate pictures in art class or whatever it is. Like you see that. And maybe you're good at, really good at math, and that's okay, go for it. But it doesn't make you special or better than anyone else. And to really, drive in that concept that it's okay. Otherwise, they're going to wonder, like, oh, is this what I need to do in life, is to be a super achiever, or people won't respect me, or I have to, if I don't get an A on every test, I'm not going to be gifted anymore, when it has nothing to do with grades and all that. So there's a lot of misconceptions that children will pick up. It's sort of like sex education, right? Like if you don't teach your children stuff, they're going to figure it out in ways that maybe you don't want them to. So kind of the same thing. I hadn't really thought of that until now, but like with gifted education, it's up to us to kind of guide our child, or to point out, like, gee, when you were playing with the kid next door, you sounded kind of mad at them, because they didn't figure out the rules of the game as quickly as you. But you need to develop some patience, that it might be harder for them. Or I noticed when we went to this family party that you just played on your iPad the whole time. You wouldn't interact. And I know it's hard sometimes to get along with other kids you don't know, but it's a good skill to learn. So let's talk about what'll help you next time, so that you figure out ways to feel more comfortable reaching out. So again, it's up to us to kind of guide them, but we need to understand ourselves and our own beliefs and what's important.
Yeah, I can only say that's so true. And when I read your book, and I am, I'm actually an HR professional, and I work with leadership topics. And being a great leader also starts with self-discovery and, working on yourself as a leader before you start managing a team. So I was like, oh, that's parallel to, parenting. And so I think people can really draw these parallels that, everything that you want to do and improve in your life starts with yourself and your self-discovery. And especially if you're an adult who didn't learn this from your parents in this great way, as you described, this great parenting, you have to do this for yourself in adulthood, right? To kind of relearn and learn all of these lessons.
Right. And how to, like you say, you're in HR. I mean, that's so complicated. How do I work collaboratively with my colleagues? How do I get along at work? How do I push for a promotion without stepping on toes or making enemies? That's a whole other topic that's so interesting to me, that is work life. And again, getting back to the gender differences you brought up about identifying giftedness, that women are much less likely to promote themselves in a work setting unless they feel like they are 100% solid and 100% sure of what they're doing. Whereas men, in some of the studies out there, can be maybe about 70% there. They don't have to feel like I have it down 100% before I promote myself and, come to my bosses and ask for a raise or ask for a different position. So it's, I think, about recognizing our strengths that we bring to the table in a work setting as well. Like you're saying, in terms of leadership, we have to be honest with ourselves, respectful of the people we lead, or they're not going to respect us. They're going to respond out of fear, but they're not going to really learn from us.
Is there something you could draw parallels from, like advocacy for your children, but also advocacy for yourself at work?
Well, I don't know if it would go over well to say, hey, I'm gifted, but just to point out, like, this is how I learn. I learn best when I'm learning through these conditions, or I have creative ideas that come up when I'm in certain settings, like just to kind of advocate for learning these. They may not be able to accommodate it, but to just put it out there. And that also shows a level of self-awareness So, for example, I don't know how it is for you in Switzerland, but here in the States, over the past 10, 15 years, in a lot of businesses, there's been this concept of open office setting, open concept, where people are maybe at desks together, but there's no doors, there's no way to go off privately. And I think they're finally realizing that doesn't help productivity. There's way too many distractions. It's too communal. It's not going to help people, especially if they have work they have to focus on the computer about, or writing or whatever. It's going to take away from them. But I think that's a concept that will go by the wayside. But if that's the case, and someone works in an open concept work situation, they might be able to say, is it okay if I go over to that, conference room when it's not in use just because I need peace and quiet to get my work done? That kind of a thing. The best you can advocate for your own productivity, I would assume that most caring employers, if they can accommodate it, will do that.
Yeah.
That's obviously not true of every work setting. Certainly, that's just a small.
And also, like, what I see is, light sensitivity, noise sensitivity. So open offices pose a other level of complexity, intensity, and overwhelm. And if you can, if your employer allows for a day working from home, for example, or something like that, or noise canceling headphones. But it's a trial and error. So I think it's also something to try to be bold and try out, and then be bold and ask for it. Because if nobody else does it, it's usually uncomfortable to be the first to ask.
Yes, exactly. And I think if it's done in a kind, collaborative, team building capacity, like, I know I work best when X, Y, and Z are in place, then it's hard to argue with that. But, some work settings are not great and people suffer, and it's really unfortunate. But even if, a gifted adult is in a work setting that is difficult for them because of the pressures they experience, to at least do things to support themselves outside of work or at work, to find peers, to find friends, find people to have lunch with, something to kind of take the edge off.
What I also encountered is I'm also working as a coach, as a gifted and neurodivergent coach. There's two types of clients, the clients that come and would like to learn more about their giftedness and how they can, live a authentic life true to themselves. And then there's clients who, now that I know, I will easily identify them and tell them that this is not the way I work. But there's clients that come, they know they're neurodivergent, but they want to coach just to mask more. They want to present more, quote unquote, neurotypical. They want to fit in more. How can I fit in more at work? How can I fit in, just more in the world and present as a neurotypical person or a non-neurodivergent person? And I think that's, in my opinion, quite sad and not living true to themselves. So,
yeah, it's really a tough dilemma, because so many have suffered already throughout their childhood, feeling different, feeling misunderstood. And then they have this dilemma as adults, like, when can I truly be myself? Or when do I have to try to figure out how to conform with, say, the work culture, the social milieu, whatever. I mean, it's really a tough dilemma. And I think that affects, everybody, but it's certainly harder for folks who are neurodivergent to figure out, okay, who can I be? How can I be authentic and genuine wherever I am? Even if it might make some people uncomfortable, or is there a way I can educate them a little bit if they don't understand?
Yeah, finding safe spaces to start unmasking a little bit. And of course, we cannot, as you mentioned, we cannot walk unmasked all the time, usually in our world, unfortunately. But also knowing when is it safe to be myself and when is it appropriate to hold a little bit back and finding this
balance. And the concept of masking, it certainly happens a lot with neurodivergent folks, but also just, straight out gifted folks without twice exceptionality often had to mask who they were, what their interests were. Once they hit middle school, once they hit, 12 or 13 years old, they had a choice. Do I fit in and tone down my interests, my personality, my energy, my enthusiasm, or do I just, find at least hopefully a small group of peers who will accept me as who I am, even if I'm not going to be the popular kid? It's a really tough one. And I think it's manifest differently with boys and girls, and certainly now with children who are non-binary. Mm-hmm. But even prior to that, just gender-wise, girls often feel pressure to be attractive and fit some feminine stereotype, which often means I can't be nerdy, I can't be good at math, I can't be a high achiever, or I won't be popular. And boys often feel pressure to be tough and masculine and hide their feelings and not be sensitive. And a lot of studies have found that for middle school age kids, gifted boys who are also athletic and who have leadership skills tend to fare the best. That sometimes their, kind of nerdy giftedness is excused and accepted, whereas those who are not athletic or don't have strong leadership skills really suffer.
So I hope with our conversation, we can change a little bit the self-esteem of gifted adults and gifted parents, and through them also the gifted children, and challenge these gender norms. Is there anything else that you would like to share with us? Something that you wish people knew, something you wish you knew earlier?
That's a great question. I just think a lot of this is about really accepting who you are, and it's okay to be different. It's okay to not fit the norm and to find people who will support that in your life. I know sometimes people are in difficult jobs or in neighborhoods where differences are not accepted and they can't always change that up. But if there's some way to connect, there's a great online community out there these days. So even if you don't have people in your neighborhood who connect with you, you can find people online many times. And just to appreciate it's okay to be different. You don't have to fit the
norm. Yeah, thank you. And it's also great to hear that for myself. Thank you so much for sharing that. If people would like to find out more about you, connect with you, where is it best for them to find you on the internet?
I'm in a bunch of places. My website is just my name, gailpost.com, and GAILPOST.com. And there's links to other ways of connecting. But I also have my blog, which is Gifted Challenges. And again, there's lots of articles there, as well as articles that I don't write, but other things that I find interesting that are through my newsletter or things I post. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I don't do as much on Instagram. It doesn't seem like a medium that really works for me. I don't even do that much on Twitter anymore. But, I have a Facebook page, not my personal Gail Post page, but my Gifted Challenges page that, if you're on Facebook, might be worth checking out. Because again, I do post lots of different articles there. And, if anybody's interested in my book, it's all the different bookseller sites on, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, on the publisher's site, Gifted Unlimited, and other smaller sites. But mostly, hopefully, if you want to connect, be happy to talk to you further. I do offer psychotherapy, although I don't offer psychotherapy abroad, but I do in the States. And I have something called PsyPack, so I can see people through telehealth in it's about 40 different U.S. states at this point. I'm authorized to do that. And I do coaching, mostly for parents, but also some gifted adults, worldwide as well. So anyway, I appreciate you having me here. This has been lovely to chat with you and learn more and also get your perspective on things.
Thank you so much for joining. And I will link all the links that you have provided in the show notes so people can just go down and click so they don't need to go and Google, so they find it. And you
Right.
just mentioned you
you.
offer therapy in the US in about 40 states through telemedicine. Is this for children or also for adults?
Adults, once in a while, I will see an adolescent, but I usually don't like to do that across state lines just because if they need to have other resources, I wouldn't know resources in their area.
No, but that's great to know. Gifted adult therapy in the US through telemedicine. They can come and reach out to you. Be careful what you wish for. You might get a lot of calls.
Oh, gosh.
And coaching worldwide.
On my website, there's a link to the thing called PsyPACT, PSYPACT, that shows what states have agreed to that legislative concept so that they allow for that. But not every state does.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gail, for being here. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your time, for your insight, for your lovely book. And thank you for the listeners to tuning in. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode and you learned something new. And if you did, please like, subscribe, and leave a review. And if you feel like somebody else that you know could profit from this, please send them a link to this show. And if you want to learn more, you find everything at giftedunleashed.com. And you can also subscribe to the newsletter there, so you will always be up to date for new things that are coming. And all the information that we mentioned today in the episode will be on the show notes for the episode. So everything is right there for you. And with that said, I wish you a wonderful day and I see you next time. Bye.